So good evening, everybody. I'm glad you're still awake, and I hope you will stay tuned for the next two talks, like the final ones of the day. And so yeah, as we have heard a lot about the last couple of days, climate change causes major changes in the composition of our European ecosystems and their ecological and economic functions. And forest management must adapt to these changes, but how? My forest practice actively set the right decisions in order to, in terms of species composition for future forests, and may even assisted migration be an option. So we urgently need models in order to that serve foresters to make these right decisions, and I would like to present you some now. So that's where we just jump in, so I don't dive into much of introduction. One of these models are occurrence-based species distribution models, which are commonly applied and that predict the potential distribution of species based on the correlation between observed presence of species and the corresponding environmental conditions. So, and what we've done here, this is such a model based on the NFI data assembled by Mauri et al. And we have used the climate EU data, which Leopoldo introduced us to before, in order to develop such an occurrence-based model. And I hope you can see it in the back, like the highest or the largest the largest area of potential habitat, so the probability with the highest probability of presence, we predict for the normal period from 1961 to 1990, so the reference period, and starting from that, Norway spruce decreases with climate change. So it first decreases towards the natural distribution, and then when we go further towards the mid and the end of the century, it will decrease even within the natural distribution. So the habitat where it will still be suitable in the future are the northern latitudes and the higher elevations. So this is what these models tell us. So okay, we are done, we can all go home now and we have it for the day. But obviously not, because spruce is not everywhere the same spruce. And provenance trials as reciprocal transplant experiments, they have clearly shown that that tree species are no large units of homogeneous response. Instead, they show they are adapted to their local environment. And this is what you see here in this graph, where we see that the tree, this is population, this is how 100 populations of Norway spruce reacted in a similar environment based on their provenance related to the mean annual temperature of the provenance. So those from warmer temperatures had a better growth than those from colder temperatures. That's not even further. They show plastic responses. So grown at different environments, which we can see here, they show a different growth response. And they're trait-based models that fill this gap. So they predict the quantitative trait expression based on observed trait variation in the field. And by doing that, they consider local adaptation and phenotypic plasticity being the most important processes in response of tree populations to climate change. And necessary prerequisite for that are provenance trials spanning large geographic and climatic gradients. So, for my PhD project, I assembled a lot of data from the international provenance trial of Norway spruce. So this huge trial series was established, was sown in 1964 and planted in 1968. And the people at that time, they did a really, really great job. So they sampled 1,100 provenances, which is a huge number, all across the natural and the artificial distribution of Norway spruce. And with these seed, they established 20 experiments with 11 blocks of 100 provenances. So they didn't just place it all together in one experiment because that would be huge. They had a smart idea in splitting it into 100 provenances for each cohort that kind of represented the whole sampling area within each of them. And they planted 20 replicates with single tree plots, and the design was the same across all of these sites. And here, with the analysis I showed now, we concentrate on tree height of age 11 because it's actually very difficult to assemble a data set from these large series where you get a good coverage across the area, but also where you have the same age at which the trees were measured. And this is necessary for this analysis. So I have applied a universal response function, which Dev was also talking about on Tuesday, I guess. And for that, there was the provenance effect, and it went into the model, provenance climate variables, site climate variables, the interaction between those, as well as the geographic variables, so latitude, longitude, and elevation, which we all tested in an iterative modeling procedure. And our final model explained 75.8% of the variance within this data, so this was quite good. But let's have more look on these variables that are shown here. So we had two site climate variables, namely the length of the frost-free period and the summer heat moisture index. And these together accounted for about 82% of the partial R-square. So that means that these spruce provenances actually exhibit a very high plasticity. So they reacted they showed a plastic response across these different environments depending on the environmental conditions. And then there's the latitude, which was like the most dominant factor for the provenance variables. And so it actually disguised the climatic adaptation, or like the climatic factors in the model, because it explained 14.6% of the partial R-square. And this may likely attributed to the post-glacial migration history. So you're likely aware of the three different domains. So wait a second, Scandinavian? No, the Baltic, exactly, the Baltic, the Sino-Carpathian domain, and the Alpine domain. It's late in the day now. So local adaptation to climate, there was the strongest effect was the continentality, so the temperature difference between mean warmest and mean coldest month's temperature, which accounted for 2.3%. And then there was also significant interaction. And if we look at that spatially, here now, for the local provenance, so that means if you would have natural regeneration of your stand at the same spot. And for the current scenario, so we had the very high growth potential that is predicted based on the data for the 1961 and the 90s, and we see from that the growth potential retreats likewise. So green means the growth potential is high, and this reddish color is a low growth potential. And if there is no growth at all, it's zero. So the green area, if we concentrate on that, it decreases over time, and towards the end of the century, it will likewise go far beyond the natural distribution. And the main effect responsible for that is the summer heat moisture index, which means an increase in temperature and a decrease in water availability. So especially, for example, like the North European plains, spruce will be completely unsuitable. But if you take a look, for example, here at these Carpathian area, where we are now, like there we actually see an increase in growth potential. And this is due to the elongation of the frost-free period. So if the frost-free period gets longer, the spruce has a longer time to grow, and then it actually, according to the model, will have a better growth potential. So great advantage of these universal response functions is that they can be solved in order to identify the optimal provenance for each environment. And this is done by derivation of the partial derivatives. And we identified the optimal provenances and predicted their growth. And what you see here is the potential gain that you may achieve if you transfer a provenance, like if you actually use the transferred provenance instead of the local provenance. So here, this blue graph. And so here you see, it's like, I hope you still can see it, that especially like at the northern latitudes and also here in the south, there appears to be potential to increase growth due to, by transferring provenances, but on the other hand, a provenance transfer may not compensate the retreat in flat and intermediate regions. So here, according to our model, we cannot really help by using other provenances. So, the goal of our study was not only to develop two different models, but also to actually compare them. And if you take a look at these two, here's the trade SDM and the occurrence SDM for the 2050s, it seems at the first glance that the trade SDM is a lot less, it draws a better scenario. So it's not as urgent or it's not as bad as this prediction. So in order to compare these, we had to translate the probability of presence and the growth to a binary occurrence, so 0 and 1. And we did that by defining the optimal threshold, so the maximum sum of sensitivity and specificity, which is frequently done in the literature for the occurrence SDM. And for the trade SDM, we thought about a different solution, because the issue about it is that these areas here, for example, in northern Scandinavia, certainly they are habitat for Norway spruce, but it has a lower growth potential. But we still want to identify these as suitable habitats, so we cannot just place like a threshold of whatever, 2 meters or something. It's just like out of my mind now. So we developed a productivity-oriented threshold surface, which was based on latitude and elevation. And by that, we could identify the high elevations and the northern latitudes as suitable habitat for Norway spruce. And in numbers, you see here that with the occurrence SDM, spruce will decrease by 40% to the 50s and 55% in the 80s. And based on the trade SDM, there's also a big retreat, but it is not as strong as for the other model. So so I come to the conclusions for spruce. Both models show a substantial retreat towards the species' core habitat. Oh, okay. So, but Norway spruce particularly high phenotypic plasticity supports species persistence. And local adaptation to climate is disguised by the latitudinal effect, likely attributed to the post-glacial migration. And provenance transfer may not prevent range decline, but may enhance growth within the remaining area. And what we see right now is that there, like beneath these stands of Norway spruce that have a lot of problem, we see very dense emerging natural regeneration. And the question is what to do with it. And we would say that we could actually kind of make use of it if we, on the one hand, decrease the turnover time, and on the other hand, introduce mixed other species to improve the resilience of the stand. So now briefly to the beach example, there's also a super huge international trial. There were 6 series established since the 1980s with over 400 provenances and 75 sites actually in 23 countries in Europe. And here we also concentrate on tree height of H11 available from these 23 sites here from three of the series. And we likewise fitted a universal response function looking at 2 site and 2 provenance climate variables. And so the variables identified were for each site and provenance a moisture and temperature-related variable that had the most explanatory value for this model. And for the reference period of 61 to 90, I guess it fitted quite well in order to to the natural distribution, which you see here as a black line according to Caudulo et al. And we can also predict this further, and this actually, there's also, it doesn't give us such a good perspective for beach, because it's also retreating a lot, and especially like here from Southern Europe. However, I call this preliminary, and I don't think that this is like the last output we will get for beach, because there is one issue with this model. There's about 97% of the variation that we could attribute by this analysis right now that it was due to the site climate. So that was a highly plastic response, and we couldn't really identify clines with good clines with the climate of provenance origin. So there was only 3% that was attributed to the climate of origin. So this brings me also to my conclusions for beach. These results are still very preliminary, and we're working on that, and we would like to improve them by looking at an older age. So they also were highly plastic, and it is very difficult to identify clines between growth and climate of origin or geography of origin. And just as an example, you see here, this is a different analysis of one provenance trial located here in northern Germany, which Niels was also talking about on Tuesday. And you see there is some poor growth, like the red means poor and the green means good growth. So there's poor growth towards the southern margin, also to the northern margin, but still like here in between, there is a lot of variation, and there's kind of areas where there's, we cannot really find clear gradients that with climate or geography. And therefore these predictions have to really be treated with caution. And finally, I just want to appeal to all of us for future series, which we actually urgently need, that we should define simultaneous measurement regimes as well, not just for the beginning when the project is initiated, but for longer, like for the 10, 20, or even 30 years, and that we measure all at the same time. This will make it a lot easier for this to derive such models in futures. And that we should go beyond the species niche, as Jill proposed in her talk. I think that is very important, because for this beach example, we have seen that many of the sites that are included in these trials, they actually represent ideal habitat for beach. So it's just a few ones that have extreme conditions, and we need these to find like the ends of the where the quadratic function goes down. Thank you very much for your attention, especially to these guys here that have been in charge of these trials for many years at our institute, and these two have measured like the latest data and together with our great nursery staff. And I'm pretty sure some of you here have already worked with some of these trials, and so thanks also goes to all of you for your immense efforts for a long time in order to actually allow these analyses to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have some questions for this modeling thing?
Thank you, Katharina, for your talk. I was wondering if soil type can also be included, or maybe I missed it, but
We didn't use it as a predictor. I would love to do it, but it's kind of hard to have it like at a very small resolution. Like if we want to look at soil, there's big databases that have like a coarse resolution, and we cannot really go down very deep if we look at many provenances and trial sites. I don't think we can go and do soil measurements now all over again. And many of these provenances actually, I'm not sure if we could exactly find the location again where they harvested in the past. That's what we're doing different today.
Thank you very much for the talk, Katharina. Oh.
Go ahead. I don't know. Takes long.
I would have a question to these provenance trials of spruce, because I think you mentioned they have been established in 1964, and we know that the transfer of spruce seeds, it went up and down. I'm just curious if they ever have been genotyped, or if it would make sense even to genotype and to control if they really, where they come from, or I don't know.
They have been. For some of them, not for the 1100, but Celine actually had some results of that on her poster, and where she was presenting her genetic analysis, trying to like find the origin of these provenances, and she could show that there was a lot of transfer for spruce as well. So it's, yeah, we have included all of them, but there are definitely many that are not autochthonous, so that have been transferred. And this also makes things complicated, yeah. But still worked fine, the model. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really, really interesting. I was just wondering, you show poorer growth on the sort of range margins there, and I wondered whether that was poor growth in relation to the other provenances, or if that is sort of in comparison to how you would expect it to grow, because obviously growth is a sort of, I mean, we say that if it doesn't grow as fast or as tall, that's poor, but actually it might not be. It might be what that tree is doing best in that environment. And so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you look at the northern latitudes, I mean, spruce grows there, and it grows over long times, but it's a lot smaller than if we would have a spruce in central, than the spruce stands in central Germany, for example. And this is why we looked at this threshold to do a surface, where we accounted for elevation and latitude to actually account for these things, because spruce is a boreal species, and it goes far north, but there has a lot smaller growth potential. Yeah, certainly right.
Thank you. It was very clear and very nice. I have a question out of curiosity, because we are doing a similar thing at the moment. If you had the chance to enrich your models now with genetic data, what would you do?
I would like to cooperate. You mean in order to identify, to see whether the provenances are actually autochthonous or not, or in order to integrate genetic or genomic data into the models? Into the model,
yeah. How could it improve your model even further? Now you're accounting for phenotypic plasticity, which is very nice, but you could also have these genotypic effects that you now do not account for now. So I was thinking, I mean, I have one idea.
It's very, I think that's very interesting. I just have to admit that this, I don't know yet. Yeah. So I certainly the way to go in future, I guess, or it would be very nice to bring these things together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think these kind of studies are a big concern for all of us. So for beets, you model 60 years ahead. So my simple question would be, did you try to model 100 years ahead?
Sorry?
My simple question would be, did you try to model the climate 100 years ahead or 120 years instead of 60 years?
Yes.
Because 60 years is not actually a lot for beets. Yeah?
Yes, I did, and it's getting worse. So for the beech, I really have to say it's, I would think I think it's still preliminary. We have to look further into this model because, it's getting even worse. We have a very small proportion of the provenance effect in there, and I think we should somehow get more provenance information, to capture more of the provenance information because it's very important. And there's difficulties with these trials as well. Like Niels was saying, that when we look at these huge beach trials, for example, this one I showed with 100 provenances, we actually see very few significant differences among these provenances. So during the first 20 years, let's say, they all grew quite well. Survival was super high at that site. Like we had about, I think, until they were 15, we had almost 90% survival. And survival declined there once there was like a self-thinning starting after like 20 years, between 20 and 30 years, there was the survival was going down quite a bit. But before we had a very, very, equal behavior kind of how they did, and also, and there's many trees that still survive a long time as like a little pencil. And they just die off due to neighbor effects, like after 20 years. So that's what my observation is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My question is just a hypothetical question. From your study, do you think we need to infuse new germplasm, like collecting again provenances from the natural land races, again start the genetic improvement of spruce or beech from the starting point, redo again the genetic improvement by infusing new germplasm strategies, something like that?
I think we should look where it actually still makes sense to do that. Like, for example, in Scandinavia, for sure. I don't know if we need to breed that much for spruce for these areas where it's supposed to be, or where it's going to be not growing anymore, for sure. So there's still, like, we have these let's say that, right, so you were talking about land races. I think land races, we cannot really connect here with these species because they're natural here in Europe. And so we can look for where it makes sense to transfer provenances and where to use provenances that likely will grow better than those local ones. But we should clearly look where it will still make sense, and also combine the different models, like look at the different models combined and see and definitely exclude areas, for example, where both models show there will be no spruce anymore, or also for beech that there will be no beech anymore. Does this respond to your question somehow?
No, I'm just asking you whether we should actually begin again. Start the genetic improvement of any species, which we are thinking about the diversity is declining.
Yeah.
We have huge provenances that we have lost, no survival, and the broad genetic base that we have could be narrow. So I'm just asking whether we should really do, and then one more international provenance collection, start the international provenance trials, coordinating all the countries, like just my.
You mean like in terms of provenance, new provenance trials, and establish new trials in order to identify populations and things?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay.
Whatever the scientists, geneticists, breeders did 50 or 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Do we need to really replicate or repeat the same thing again? That's what the question is, because I just understood something from your study. That's what.
Yeah, I think it still makes sense to look for, like for beech. For example, I would certainly say it still makes sense to look into, to look for a new trial series maybe, and then also plant them outside, like the current range, in order to see whether there are actually provenances that can still grow under these conditions that we will expect in future. Maybe not as huge as these collections.
Yeah, that's what I was telling you.
They could be a lot more specific about, like, based on these collections or these older studies, be a lot more like picky in which provenances to choose, because we know a lot right now about differences among them, and also where the sites should be located, and then do like a more intensive or do an intense monitoring that is overlapping in time slots and stuff.
I think we should move on now.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, Katharina.
Thank you.